I'm JT Crawford, your host to the history of Barkley Regional Airport and aviation history in Paducah, Kentucky. For nearly a century, Paducah has been a regional aviation hub. Since 1946, Barkley Regional has served commercial passengers as well as private pilots. Having a regional airport affords our city and region access to the world. Just as important, an airport brings the world to our front door. Even though Barkley Regional Airport has ushered passengers in and out of Paducah for over 80 years, it was not the city's first airport. Before we get to Barkley, let's take a look at aviation history in Paducah and those who saw great potential in taking to the skies. Throughout most of human history, mankind has been shackled by gravity. Our ancestors looked upward, dreaming of what it felt like to cut the bonds that tie us to the ground and soar beyond the clouds. Inventive minds took to the wild blue yonder, and by the early 1900s, we were well on our way to rising above the trees, reaching new heights and destinations in record time. In just 7 years, from 1903, when the Wright brothers achieved their sustained flight, to 1910, when a pilot flew 46 miles in an hour, technology rapidly advanced. It was in 1911 that Paducah's newspaper announced they had arranged for an aviation meeting with pilot H.A. Robinson, who would give the city its first view of one of the new machines of marvel. Robinson was a pupil aviation pioneer of Glenn Curtiss, who had successfully challenged the Wright brothers' domination by taking the invention of the aircraft and improving it, adapting it to practical uses. Robinson had been instructing Army and Navy officers before touring the country with a Curtiss aircraft. The paper reported at that time the only other airplane flight in Kentucky had been made in Louisville. The first flights of aircraft in Paducah occurred over 2 days in May when Hugh Robinson performed feats which were beyond the expectations of thousands, with hair-raising dips and glides. 4 men held the plane until the engine, rated at 60 horsepower, came up to speed. Upon the signal of Robinson, the men let go, the biplane racing forward until gaining enough momentum to lift off the ground. Spectators were amazed at the speed of the propeller, which went so fast that it was invisible. The paper reported that the staccato bark of the motor resembles a whole battery of Gatling guns in action, and that such flight was the last word in the conquest of the air for which men have striven for centuries. The makeshift airfield was west of Paducah, described as being near Gregory Heights, just off West Jefferson Street, just due west of the current location of the Coke plant. Schools and businesses closed to allow residents to see Mr. Robinson fly. The first flight was 3 minutes and a test flight which encircled the field. The circle encompassed about 3 miles, amazing the crowd that he was traveling a mile a minute. The second flight was 8 minutes in length, and as reported, the crowd of thousands felt their hearts leap into their mouths as Robinson began to perform stunts. The third flight was reportedly the most spectacular, with Robinson ascending to 750 feet, doing some stunts, and then being forced into a crash landing due to a strong gust. Fortunately, he and the plane survived and moved on to a second day of aerial acrobatics. From that moment on, Paducah was hooked on the aviation fad. Cities across the country clamored for pilots to give exhibitions, declaring citywide aviation days and weeks. Just 2 years after Hugh Robinson wowed crowds with Paducah's first flight, 24-year-old Tony Janis, who was part owner of the Benoit Aircraft Company in St. Louis, spent time in Paducah, showcasing the Benoit Flying Boat, an aircraft that only needed the Ohio River for a runway. Janis was an applauded pilot, praised for simply surviving the first years of aircraft development, when flying was extremely dangerous, and reports of pilot deaths and injuries were common. The Benoit was an early passenger aircraft, and Paducahans were invited to not only watch Janis in the air, but to also join him. The wait list was long.
May 1918, and the first American DH-4s rolled directly from assembly sheds to the airfields. Only 8 months after they were ordered into production, they joined American aviators ready for the big push.
As war often does, it helped push technology to new heights when the airplane became a central figure in World War I. People also looked to aircraft to aid in mail delivery and carry passengers farther, faster. In July of 1927, contractor and lumber dealer Charles Eisemann announced he would open Paducah's first airfield. Eisemann purchased 2 travel airplanes to carry passengers and teach flight lessons. In August, Eisemann Airfield opened just southeast of Paducah, near Paducah's south side. Eisemann recruited pilot C.W. Roderick of Wichita, Kansas, a veteran Army pilot, to give flights and teach. On its first day open, the airfield welcomed 2 airplanes that stopped while on a cross-country trip, and Roderick flew the first airfield-owned aircraft in from Wichita, a flight that took 7 hours and 10 minutes. Eisemann advertised passenger service to Louisville, Memphis, St. Louis, Chicago, and more. Will J. Gilbert, a druggist, was the sole passenger of Paducah's first commercial flight on March 27, 1928, when he enlisted one of the flying machines to take him to St. Louis for a business trip. The flight, which took about an hour and a half, was enjoyable, according to Mr. Gilbert. Mr. Gilbert, who was supposed to return the following day, had to postpone his trip due to strong winds. The delay was much to the dismay of a gathered crowd and the Elks Gazook Band, who had prepared to greet him. The paper reported that he was the first Paducah druggist to ever cross the Ohio and Mississippi rivers in an airplane. Eisemann Field became a popular stopping point for pilots on their way to and from other destinations. Paducahans occasionally got views of visitors doing stunts in the skies above the city. The public had the opportunity to take flight by paying just a few dollars for local rides. In 1928, 15 teachers from Paducah Public Schools took turns riding in one of the planes, some of them doing loop-the-loops, barrel rolls, hammer stalls, and the wing-over. For a while, you could take an airplane ride by simply paying 1 cent per pound if you were willing to divulge your weight. Eisemann even advertised trips to the Kentucky Derby for $60. And in December, commissioners took to the skies at the encouragement of Mayor Ernest Lackey. Eisemann Field was a good start for Paducah, but it was quickly evident that it was not sufficient for the rapid growth of aviation. The city didn't know whether to support and expand Eisemann's vision or to start anew. By 1928, the question was, shall Paducah have an airport? It was already understood that aviation probably would not be a huge money-making venture, but it would be useful for airmail. It would give the city a measure of prestige and valuably advertise who we are. And surely in the future it would bring dollars into the town. After all, the automobile was once a curiosity, and by then everyone could drive a car. A Paducah Evening Sun editorial read, "The towns and cities which have enough vision to anticipate the future benefits of aviation will be the ones to reap the reward." Before the city could act, investors from Indiana took interest, buying the field and establishing Paducah Airways, with plans to expand. By then, aviation terms had become a part of Paducah's vernacular, with regular aviation columns in the newspaper, a roster of students at the Paducah Airways Flight School, charter flights, and an Aviation Queen contest. Those who flew in and out of Paducah were reported on in the newspaper, and one gentleman, upon learning that another man was cured of deafness after being in an aircraft that made a sudden drop, chartered a plane to try the same experiment. It was unsuccessful. By then, aircraft in Paducah could make cross-country flights and could go up to 150 miles per hour. The connectivity to the world was on display in 1933 when Santa Claus, in his own aircraft, made a stop in Paducah. Thousands welcomed Santa before joining him for a parade from the airfield to the county courthouse and through downtown. In the early 30s, 5 citizens from Paducah flew to Owensboro to attend the Tillman-Owensboro football game, demonstrating the ease of recreational travel. By then, the city had established a committee to explore opening a municipal airport. Again, they looked at purchasing and expanding Paducah Airways or establishing a new field. For a time, a spot near Noble Park was considered. In 1934, funding through the Civil Works Administration allowed Paducah to start on its first municipal airport. Workers broke ground on Coleman Road and built the airfield in the current location of Dippin' Dots. In May, the Junior Chamber of Commerce hosted the Century of Thrills Air Circus to raise funds to build a hangar. Private planes put on shows including parachute jumps, stunt flying, and wing walking. Non-aviation acts included the driving of an automobile through a burning building. At the end of June, the city dedicated the new airport with speeches, an air show, and flights of 16 airplanes that left Louisville and visited 5 new Kentucky airports, including Paducah. Airmail finally became a reality in 1938. The municipal airport was not only a hub for passengers and planes to refuel, it remained a center for entertainment, hosting plenty of air carnivals, Of course, death-defying acts were still on the regular schedule, with people like Cliff Tribble, a stunt pilot, Wendy, the world's only parachute dog jumper, and Alan von Baron, who fell 4,000 feet before opening his parachute.
That first parachute jump is a great moment in a dog's life. The fur-lined harness has a tailor-made fit and is all ready for the takeoff. As a reward, dog eats hot dog.
While commercial flight was a reality in Paducah in 1940, regularly scheduled passenger service was not. City leaders wanted regular service, but the municipal airport was too small at 52 acres. Plus, newer aircraft needed the luxury of hard-surfaced runways, not former cow pastures. In 1940, the CAA visited several sites considered for a new airport by the newly formed Greater Paducah Association Aviation Committee. In 1941, the Paducah and McCracken County governments jointly agreed to purchase 486 acres west of Paducah for a new airport. Edwin J. Paxton, Jr., chairman of the Greater Paducah Association Airport Airlines Committee and a director of the Paducah Airport Corporation, was an aviation fan. He had championed the idea of an airport for years. And when the city and county came together to purchase the land, he took off for D.C. to talk to the Civil Aeronautics Authority about their agreement. The CAA had already inspected the grounds. The National Defense Airport Act had been passed by the federal government to provide funding, and plans were moving forward. Once fully approved, the ball rolled quickly on construction, and in no time, Paducah was to be home to a truly modern airfield with concrete runways. Instead of a great celebration when work began, however, there was an air of solemn reserve. Between the time of conception to reality, there was one major development: the United States entrance into World War II. Mr. Paxton opined, "On Monday, work was at last begun. There was no fanfare, no ceremony. Workmen simply started the job as something good and necessary to the prosecution of the war. It will surely prove useful in the war, which will please every McCracken Countyan. This airport will also prove later on to be one of the most beneficial long-range developments in the community's history." Construction continued into 1942, and on November 3rd of that year, CAA inspectors gave the final okay to open the Paducah McCracken County Airport. The next day, Lieutenant C.C. Park, Metropolis native and Army pilot, made the first official landing at Paducah's new airport in a military plane. He was coming home to visit his mother. The city and county planned a formal dedication for the following weekend, and it was to be a celebration. Guests included Governor Keene Johnson, military pilots with their planes, military heroes from the region, the head of the aviation department of the Shell Oil Company, Senator Alben Barkley, and city and county commissioners, many of whom were to drive to Memphis and fly back to Paducah aboard a Chicago and Southern Airlines passenger plane, accompanied by airline executives. But bad weather called for all flights to be canceled. Instead, a large crowd gathered at the Irvin Cobb Hotel for dinner and speakers, the keynote being Alben Barkley. A Paducah Sun Democrat writer thought positively, stating that there would be plenty of time for flight in the future, and that the new airport was not exactly a thing of beauty anyway. At the time, grass had yet to grow back around the property and no buildings had been erected. Flight students began using the airport for training. Just a week later, 18-year-old Martha Ann Howell became the first student pilot to solo from the new airport. For a time, the potential of the airport remained dormant. By the spring of 1943, electricity had yet to be run to the field. Workers installed a complete lighting system for the runways, nonetheless, as city leaders worked to get electricity to the airport. They also lobbied the government to utilize the airport for military purposes. Initially, the military showed little interest. Then in late spring, the U.S. Army Air Transport Command said yes and took control of the airport and used it for the training of pilots and transport of aircraft. Ground crews arrived and erected tents, and the McCracken County Red Cross Canteen Corps took supplies of food to the arriving support crews. The government arranged for 25 buildings used in the construction of Kentucky Ordnance Works to be moved to the airport to provide for temporary barracks and offices. The 20th Ferrying Group, who had the responsibility of flying aircraft from factories to airfields for war purposes, were charged with making check flights. Many of the pilots, experienced as they were using new military planes they had never piloted. The military used the Paducah-McCracken County Airport as a turnaround point for pilots as they flew out of Nashville on the initial check flights. The war effort was also central at the old municipal airport on Coleman Road for a while, as the Kentucky Civil Air Patrol ran drills, dropping bombs, which were sacks of flour. However, life at the old airport eventually came to a standstill as the Army purchased almost every plane that had been housed there. Life with the military wasn't always rosy. Residents complained of low-flying airplanes, and the newly constructed airport suffered a lot of wear and tear. Later, a rift emerged between our local governments and the Army when the U.S. government didn't pay for repairs of damages done to the field while under the control of the military. In 1945, a settlement was finally reached. During the war, commercial airlines eyed the new Paducah Municipal Airport as a possibility to extend their services. American Airlines officials made several visits, but ultimately Chicago and Southern Airlines were granted permission first to extend their service from Memphis to Detroit by way of Paducah. Henry Ward, a Sun writer, urged the city and county to properly develop the airport before the first commercial flights. In 1943, he said, "Right now the airport consists of little more than concrete runways and a lighting system. It needs administration buildings, hangars, and other equipment. Incidentally, what the airport needs most of all right now is a telephone. Pilots have to walk a mile to reach a phone so they can call in to Paducah." The city and county formed a board to operate the airport, and they appointed Richard Leroy as the first manager. 1944 and 45 were years of great activity. Plans emerged to build an inexpensive but adequate administration building. Additional trees were removed, parking expanded, and a hangar was built. In September 1945, the young airport welcomed the biggest guest to date, President Harry Truman in his C-54 Skymaster known as the Sacred Cow, a forerunner to Air Force One. Truman was in town to drop off a sole passenger, Senate Majority Leader Alben Barkley. Truman spent some time greeting reporters and the thousands that had gathered to see him. During that era, flight training for new pilots flourished. The possibilities of shipping cargo came to fruition when 2 cargo planes flew 500 crates of McCracken County Dixie Aroma strawberries to markets in New York, Chicago. Chicago and Southern Airlines established passenger service in Paducah with daily schedules of Evansville, Indianapolis, Fort Wayne, Toledo, Detroit, Memphis, Jackson, and New Orleans. On April 1, 1946, the first Chicago and Southern DC-3 passenger plane, the city of Fort Worth, made a smooth landing at the airport. 20 passengers were aboard. Many were former Paducahans who had booked a flight home to visit family. Also aboard were executives with Chicago and Southern. The passengers exited the plane to the fanfare of those gathered. Additionally, a Chicago and Southern cargo plane landed shortly thereafter. Gene Peak of WPAD broadcast interviews live and an official welcoming ceremony commenced. The day ushered in the age of regular passenger flights for Paducah. The name Paducah-McCracken County Airport had always been considered by most to be temporary. In 1948, shortly after Paducah native Alben Barkley won the vice presidency of the United States, the city and county approved a new name, Barkley Airport. The name change not only recognized his ascendance to a high office, but also recognized Barkley's love for aviation and his support of the project in the early 1940s. In August 1949, the Barkley Air Show welcomed home Vice President Alben Barkley in his vice presidential plane, and the next day an estimated 20,000 people came to the airport to hear him speak and see the air show. As part of the ceremony, Barkley crowned 7 queens, with the Queen of Queens being Dorothy Ann Barkley, Alben's 6-year-old granddaughter. About 375 private, military, and commercial planes were on the field, many of which were part of shows later that day. The climax of the day was a 40-man parachute jump by the 11th Airborne Division from Fort Campbell. At one point, the line of traffic to get to the airport extended to the intersection of 13th Street and Park Avenue in town. President Truman wrote to the citizens of Paducah, "I am indeed happy to learn that you are going to rededicate your local airport to Vice President Barkley. No man is better entitled to honors than this distinguished son of Kentucky. Alben Barkley has been a true progressive through all the years of his fine public service. It seems to me, therefore, that it is appropriate that an airport, symbol of progress, should be named for him. I wish I could be with you, for I know that another visit to Paducah would add to my already large store of pleasant memories of that city. With my best wishes for a successful and inspiring celebration and my warm greetings to my good friend Alvin Barkley and all of you, I am very sincerely yours, Harry S. Truman. The city beamed with pride as about a week later Paramount released a newsreel nationwide with a story about Barkley's visit. That newsreel has not been seen since 1949, until now. The Sherman Grinberg Film Archive recently brought the film out of the vault for us and digitized it so we could see the news story from that day. Here, for the first time in over 70 years, is that newsreel.
Alvin W. Barkley returns to his native Paducah, Kentucky to dedicate the airport renamed in his honor. Among those accompanying the 71-year-old vice president are his daughter and a friend, Mrs. Carlton Hadley, 37-year-old St. Louis widow. Mr. Barkley had previously denied rumors speculating on whether he intended to wed Mrs. Hadley. He told reporters that Mrs. Hadley and her daughter would be in Paducah as his guests for the airport dedication ceremonies. Right now, Mr. Barkley sees his grandchildren unveil the commemoration plaque. Then the vice president crowned 7 queens, including granddaughter Dorothy Ann, and says that she was the queen he meant when he was quoted recently as saying he was going to crown a queen of his own someday. A remark which made nationwide news as his only reference to the rumors of romance.
Well, I think there was a little something about the airport in that reporting. A few months later, Barkley and Jane did indeed wed. Passenger service continued to grow, and in 1950, the airport board applied for federal aid to construct a proper terminal. The building would include better parking, baggage handling areas, and a spacious lobby, ticket counters, and a restaurant. Just like today, federal and state funds only covered Berry Centrals, so a campaign to raise donations from businesses and individuals helped with furnishing the building and purchasing additional items to make the terminal a first-rate facility. In subsequent years, the airport acquired additional property, extended runways, upgraded technology as needed, and made some modifications to the 1953 terminal. From 1941 until now, Barkley Regional Airport's footprint has more than doubled in size, going from about 500 acres to over 1,000. And just as in its earliest days, the business of aviation continues to shift and develop, never remaining static. Staying at the forefront of those changes is as challenging now as it has ever been. From cow pasture fields to regular jet flights, Paducah still has its eyes on the skies, anticipating how the future of aviation will benefit our citizens and our city and region. So what can we learn from our city's history with aviation? It has been said that vision is the art of being able to see what is invisible to others. And while we laud vision realized, it's sometimes difficult for visionaries to find support and acceptance for their ideas, even after much toil at illustrating their concept. Bringing it to light isn't always easy. After all, it's invisible. As I researched the history of flight in Paducah, I was struck by those who had foresight for what could be. Even when flying was nothing more than an engine, a wood frame, and some canvas, there were those in Paducah who looked beyond the novelty and saw possibilities. The future sometimes looked hazy, but they knew Paducah would benefit from its own place in the world of aviation. Those dreamers saw beyond the clouds of that day and toward the horizon of tomorrow. We are once again at the dawn of a new vision for Barkley Regional Airport. Expansions and upgrades make it a first-rate facility. At the same time, there are plenty of challenges within the aviation industry, experiencing turmoil and uncertainty, especially in smaller markets. Now more than ever, we need vision. And just like in 1911, the possibilities are not completely clear. The past, the present, and the future of those who've championed aviation in Paducah inspired me to rethink what it means to have vision. We want it to be a clear path with an obvious end result and benefits, but those are often absent at the genesis of an idea, and they may remain elusive for a while. This can be a deterrent for both the visionary and those whom he or she needs to convince. From this, we find 2 takeaways. If I do not nurture aspiration due to fear, I do a disservice to myself and my community. And if I immediately discount another's vision, I again play a role in squelching a possible incredible future. In 2021, Paducah Life Magazine featured Barkley Regional Airport on its cover. Immediately after the photo shoot that featured an airplane stopped for a scheduled flight, 41 passengers boarded and took to the sky. Then within a matter of half an hour, 2 private planes took off and a corporate jet landed. This was an average afternoon. And though it wasn't completely clear in the early 20th century, this is what someone vaguely saw in their mind's eye over 100 years ago. May we be inspired by not only what the potential is for our airport, may we see what the possibilities are for the future of our city. May we engender our own visions and not be quick to discount the concepts of others. With a few dreams and some productive time with our heads in the clouds, we may just touch down into a future beyond anything we can imagine.